And then here. Oh, great. Okay. Thank you so much. So, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us in the session this morning. So it will be a pretty open, easy session. We're planning 3 talks. I haven't heard from one person, so it may be 2 talks this morning. The usual time limit, probably 10 or 15 minutes per talk. And then we'll have a lot of time for discussion. So I think after the couple of talks, I might put my slides back up from yesterday because the couple of key people joining us for the session to kind of co-lead the conversation weren't here yesterday for the talk. So maybe I'll just kind of go just a couple of slides just to brief you on what I described yesterday in different knowledge systems and some potential potential problems with using the technical architecture of one dominant knowledge system in everything that we do. As a preface to think about how we can begin to constellate knowledges, right, from what we do, other knowledge systems, other sciences. So we'll hear from a couple of talks today about some work from a non-dominant perspective in environmental sciences, and then I'll show those couple of slides, and then we can have a larger conversation. And there were a lot of great questions yesterday. We didn't really have time after my talk for many questions, but there were some great questions that I could not really answer. And I think that there are other people here that are better equipped to answer those kinds of questions. So hopefully it'll be a nice, fruitful discussion. So you can be thinking about if you have any outstanding questions from the talk that I gave yesterday, just things that really don't make sense to you or ways that maybe work together. We can have a think about that. We'll have lots of time for discussion, probably an hour, even if we want for discussion after that. It'll be a pretty open session. I don't even think a session. I think we presented it as just a talking circle. So Ruth, if you'd like, I'll let you get started with us. And would you like to take some time to introduce yourself as well and what you do?
Yep.
Okay, then we'll hand it all through. Okay, thanks so much. And we'll do larger introductions after the talks.
Ani Bojo, Ruth Duncan, Nishnakaz, Nashingiming, Nanojaba, Wabajashi Dodam. Hi, hello, my name is Ruth Duncan. I'm from Nashingiming, otherwise known as the Chippewas and Nawash Unceded First Nation, and I'm part of the Martin Clan. Today I'm going to be talking about knowledge equity and research by using insights from a project that I was a part of, known as the Bamaj Project, which is an Anishinaabemowin word that translates into to track or to follow along, which is essentially what we did with Lake Whitefish. So I'm going to talk about my project a little bit and then how it can be used when you're conducting two-eyed seeing or community-based research. So, like I said, my name is Ruth Duncan. I'm an Anishinaabe Kwe, and I'm from the territory of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. I grew up on the water on the shores of Lake Huron and Georgian Bay. And for as long as I can remember, water has been of great importance to me. My favorite place is to be on the water. I just recently finished my 2nd year here at Trent University in the Indigenous Environmental Science program. And currently I'm a junior aquatics and fisheries specialist for Collective Consulting and Research, which is an environmental consulting company that provides a unique service to help address present and emerging environmental issues by bringing together scientific tools and community knowledge. So, like I said, I'm from the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, and the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation is comprised as 2 communities known as Saugeen First Nation, and then my nation, the Chippewas and Nawash Unceded First Nation, which are the areas in the very dark green up on the map. San territory covers roughly 2 million acres of land and water, and our water stretches all the way to the Canadian-US border on the Lake Huron side. And it contains all the land from the tip of the Saugeen or the Bruce Peninsula, which is known as Tobermory, all the way down to the Maitland River system, and then Godridge. So it's huge chunk of land, and both communities located in the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation are on the water, and we are known as fishing nations. Neoshingaming, which is the Anishinaabewin name for my reserve, actually translates to the land surrounded by water. So before I dive into the Bomage project, I wanted to give a little background on this very important fish, dikemeg, which is the Anishinaabewin word for lake whitefish. For a very long time, the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation has harvested dikemeg for trade, ceremony, sustenance, and economical value in some cases, which has developed into a strong cultural connection and important relationship between the people of Son and this fish. The people of Son have depended on their relationship with the waters of Lake Huron and its fish species, especially dikemeg, for time immemorial. Over the past 2 decades or so, there have been some drastic changes in our waters, which have resulted in the decline of this fish. This decline has been felt and seen by many of my community's fish harvesters and members, and addressing the declines that have been seen and understanding the reasoning behind them has become a great priority for my community. The Bomage project came to be through many community meetings, interviews, and various outreach events. And this project was co-designed. So in this case, the community was placed in the driver's seat from the very beginning before we even knew what this project was going to be. The next step was finding partners and collaborators that accepted and understood that the community was going to be in the driver's seat, and that they were at the center of our project. So for funding, we made sure that was clear. Our next step was to build in additional tools for community education, and these became major priorities in the research project. Some of those included intern placements and lots of opportunities for youth to be a part of the process and community workshops. So we ended up landing on these for our project objectives. One was to improve the understanding of dikemeg and their spawning shoals. 2 was to provide the Son community with opportunities to learn about Son ecological knowledge related to dikemeg and technology, as well as building community. And 3, to create a 2-eyed seeing process with smart technology that could be shared with the rest of the Great Lakes community. One aspect of this project was the use of an underwater ROV, or remotely operated vehicle. So this piece of smart technology created a very unique opportunity for community education and participation through workshops. With the research team, youth volunteers, and any interested community members were able to deploy the ROV with us in areas of interest, as well as a shoal that we are conducting our work on. What the ROV does is record footage of fish habitat features, their status, impacts, disturbances, such as invasive species like zebra mussels. And then with the ROV footage, we are able to create maps and imagery with the data we've collected. Shown in many of the pictures on this slide is workshops where youth and the Son community were able to use the underwater drone. And I really like showing these photos because when we did community work and outreach with the youth, there was just almost always so much fun happening and exciting things being able to see, like from the fish's perspective. And a lot of the youth had smiles on their faces, and it was just really fun. And I think it's very important for Indigenous youth to have opportunities like this, to see research being done in a good way in their communities, and to have the chance to be involved in this work, because Indigenous youth are the future of our communities, and it's extremely beneficial for them to see people like them doing science and benefiting their home communities. And I think it's also important to note that these Indigenous youth are not only our future, but they are our present. Another aspect, before I go on, here's just a little video of what our underwater robot would see when on a whitefish spawning shoal. So another aspect of this work was receiver deployment. So in the picture shown above is the Little Port Elgin Shoal, which is where we decided to do our work. And this place was identified by fish harvesters from my community as a priority spot for research to be done. So we had 11 receivers and we ended up tagging 49 fish. And throughout the whole process of tagging and picking the spot, fish harvesters from the community were with us, catching the fish, choosing the spot, and helping with fish surgeries. And then this video showcases the 49 fish that we tagged and their movement throughout the shoal. So each different colored dot is a separate fish. And when we got this data, we were so excited to share it with the community and the fishermen and women, because what we saw in the data is exactly what our fishermen and community members told us we would see, meaning that the data we collected through the project wasn't validating what the fish harvesters have been saying and sharing with us, but using both Western knowledge and Indigenous knowledge, we were able to create a better, deeper, clear understanding of how we should be interpreting this data. The technology is used to help us investigate, but really it is the ecological knowledge of the Song community that is leading us through the entire process. So the VPS data I'm showing here is not proving science, but telling a story in a different way and strengthening our understanding in a broader, multidimensional way. A defining characteristic of the research in the Bomage project is two-eyed seeing. And it's said best by Dr. Albert Marshall, who coined the term. Two-eyed seeing is using and valuing both Indigenous knowledge and Western science together at an even playing field. Two-eyed seeing recognizes the difference between each knowledge system and bridges them together. When both perspectives are used together, we provide a more broad and holistic understanding of what's going on with lake whitefish. And conducting this research with a two-eyed seeing approach is very important, because when it is not done correctly, it can harm the nation or the community that is involved in the research. When we talk about the relationship between traditional ecological knowledge and research, there's a bit of a history. There have been so many different ways that researchers have attempted to include Indigenous knowledge, but oftentimes this type of research falls short of the communities that are involved. This could be done by just sprinkling in interviews with community knowledge holders, or co-applying with the community for funding, but then having the entire project designed and driven by the researcher and what they want to do, instead of actually co-collaboration and the community being a part of the process as well. Sometimes it's where a project happens, the research is done, and then the community hears nothing back, and there's no real solution or action that the community can benefit from. It could be making a trusting relationship with the nation or community, and then just using their lands and waters to conduct whatever studies the researcher is interested. Sometimes it's for funding, or even just to have a box checked on application. And these ill moves have harmed many communities in the past, and it makes it difficult for these communities to want to collaborate on projects in the future. So it's important to note that while sometimes the outcomes do benefit the community, more needs to be done, and we need to be centering Indigenous knowledge when working with Indigenous communities. Now, what does it mean to center Indigenous knowledge? What it means to center Indigenous knowledge means to center the community, their knowledges, and involvement and influence through the entire research process, start to finish. It is when this is done that the outcomes are actually of greatest value to not only the community, but to society as a whole. There are so many moments in research when you have a choice to conduct things Western science, or let the community give their say and trust what they think. And I think that with many researchers, it's hard to even realize when these moments happen. But once it's realized, it can be so beneficial to just listen to the community and their knowledge instead of conducting research the way you know. For this project, that ended up paying off well. An example is when we were tagging the fish just with the researchers, we weren't catching any fish and weren't having any luck. We brought our traditional fish harvesters in, and fish were caught immediately and in a good way. Also, with the shoal that was chosen, it was chosen by the fish harvesters, and in all parts, they insisted, from catching the fish to interpreting the data. Through this project, there have been so many opportunities for new training for community members, new knowledge of the fish that we all hold now. And within this project specifically, the data that we created is now being used for important management decisions with how we think about fish habitat protocol and how federal agencies think about fish habitat protocol. This project has also created a snowball effect, so successful that our sister nation, Saugeen First Nation, is planning on pursuing a new project very similar to the Bamaj project. And firsthand myself, I've just seen so much pride in this project through multiple generations. And I just wanted to end with this slide with these very two important points, which is co-learning and co-decision making, because this is what makes space for knowledge equity. There's a lack of concrete examples and applications of fishery-specific two-eyed seeing in the Great Lakes. And because Indigenous communities are so tightly linked to the land and waters through their rights, knowledge systems, culture, and way of life, it is important that as all of us as treaty people move forward, we are creating information used to inform decision-making and understanding of our Great Lakes. And while doing that, Indigenous communities need to be included as it is essential for keeping these nations informed and protecting their rights and cultures. I hope that the Bamaj project provides a good example of two-eyed seeing research that can be learned from, shared, and used in the future with the wider Great Lakes community. And thank you, Miigwech. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank all the project partners that were part of the Bamaj project. And that's everything from me.
Yeah, part of the circle, just be able to bring all the rings.
Yeah, I think that's great. And if anybody had a very pointed question, please feel free to ask Ruth now. Otherwise, we can have a working session later.
Great, Ruth, that was awesome.
Oh, maybe we'll just go. Julia. Maybe we'll go Julia next. Okay, great. Should I stop share? Okay, perfect. You've got it all taken care of. Okay, it looks like Julia, are you prepared to go with this? Okay, perfect. Hi. So yeah, just a couple of thoughts there. I did receive some introduction, and thank you, Ruth. That was an incredible talk. She did send me a little bit more information about herself. She's been here at Trent University for some time, and also at the Junior Aquatics and Fisheries Specialist. That's apparently her job, her title with Collective Environmental. And yeah, just incredible representation of the work that you do. There are so many important things there. And I deeply appreciate you bringing in the two-eyed seeing approach. We had some conversation about that yesterday after my talk. I didn't bring it into the talks explicitly, but we can talk more about that particular approach and what that means. But yeah, you've just seen an incredible example of that. And that really gets back to, how do we have this broader, as Ruth said, broader, more multi-dimensional understanding. So I'll talk a little bit more about that from yesterday, and how do we bring that into the work that we do. And wow, what a great, it's incredible to have these people come in and share with us the approaches. I was talking about yesterday, and they seem pretty disconnected from what it is we'd actually do. And there's some questions about, okay, well, how would we actually do this? How would our scientists support in this way? So very grateful to hear from people who have been doing this work for some time in a really good way. And then I think just a few words about Julia. She's joining us. I'm sure she'll tell us about herself. She's joining us from BC, as I understand. She's GIS program manager at Farlight Group. She came from the research group that I'm now with at Carleton University. where she did her thesis project on co-produced GIS and interactive web maps with Clyde River Inuit hunters for use in travel planning. So I may have shown a few slides from that project yesterday in my talk. Julie, if you're ready, I'd love for you to go ahead and introduce yourself as you'd like, and please go ahead with your talk and take your time.
Great,
Lovely.
thank you. I guess first off, can you see my presentation? I just shared my screen.
We can, thank you.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Conzen. As Chrissy mentioned, I am the GIS program manager at the Firelight Group, which is an Indigenous-owned research consultancy group. I'm currently presenting on the traditional territories of the Algonquin, or sorry, I used to, the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations out in Vancouver. I'm a second generation settler, so my perspective and presentation today comes from being a Southern researcher working with an Inuit community in Nunavut, specifically Clyde River. So we'll go into kind of what my thesis entailed. So before delving into the methods and results, the local context is crucial to this research. In this case, the project was situated within the Clyde River community on eastern Baffin Island, as seen in the map. Clyde River is predominantly an Inuit community that has close ties to their local culture, language, and lands, such as practicing subsistence hunting. Staff at Ituk Heritage and Research Center, which is an organization under Ilisaqsivik Society and was a crucial and essential partner to this research, and they're better known as Ituk. They are a community-led organization that is based in Clyde River and staff Inuit hunters that focus on promoting Clyde River Inuit knowledge, culture, and economy through land-based programming and strength-based research. In partnership with the Carleton's Geomatics and Cartographic Research Center, in 2015, the Clyde River Knowledge Atlas was released to the community. The Atlas hosts a series of web-based modules that present different geovisualizations or interactive maps and other types of visualizations and graphics for community and public use. So some are available to the public and some are closed off and only accessible to community members or elders. The Atlas is built using Carleton University's Nunavut Atlas framework, which you will learn probably a little bit more about today. It is an open source Atlas developer toolkit that is developed by the GCRC. Since 2009, Ituk has been working with Colorado researchers through the Exchange for Local Observations and Knowledge of the Arctic, or ALOCA, at University of Colorado and Colorado State University to install community-defined weather monitoring stations. So this means that the locations of the stations were determined through deep engagement sessions between Southern researchers, the Hunters and Trappers Association, Hamilton Council of Clyde River, and other elders and knowledge holders within the community. Outcomes included 4 weather stations installed in relevant areas, both for community traveling and hunting activities, which are highlighted in pink, but also to measure the local weather. Therefore, now there are regional and more local scaled analytical environmental models of what they call human relevant environmental variables, or HREVs, that have been carried out by one of their research partners, Dr. Glenn E. Liston, who is using measurements from the 5 weather stations, as well as the Environment and Climate Change Canada's station that is based at the airport, which is seen in green on the map. Actually, unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to update the map, but a 5th weather station by the community was installed this past spring, and they're now integrating that data into the models as well in time. Specific to this project are 2 models that Dr. Liston had produced for wind speeds and direction, as well as significant wave heights for Clyde River. Each estimated measurement is calculated every 250 meters across varying regions agreed upon by Ituk. Though these models provide a more localized context, for example, using topography as an influencer of local weather conditions over temperature, there was feedback from Ituk staff and hunters that the visualizations were not easy to use and understand compared to the existing platforms they use, such as Windy and Environment and Climate Change Canada's weather and marine forecasts. So with that in mind, there were 3 kind of research objectives that were shaped together with Ituk and myself. 1, broadly to support the mobilization of the wind and wave HREVs. 2, more specifically, collaboratively design, develop, and overarchingly co-produce a knowledge system that intertwines Clyde River Inuit worldviews, knowledges, and practicalities with these HREVs. And 3, through an easy to use or usable and useful spatial data infrastructure and visual representations through a geographic information system coined by the community as WABI. As such, this project explored the intersection of political theory and design and development of technologies, specifically geographic information systems for communities that have been historically marginalized. To meet the objectives and answer the research questions that we shaped together, this research project had followed a co-production framework. So essentially from this, I had modified the human-centered design product lifecycle presented by Baxter et al. By situating the stages of production within a community context, and further by adjusting their suggested methodologies with different collaborative and participatory methodologies recommended by various Indigenous and non-Indigenous scholars to assure equitable outcomes for all research partners of the study. So therefore, the Clyde River community was foundational to the co-production lifecycle, which included having ETech contributing to the research objectives, questions, communications, and review results. For example, they organized and did all the recruitment with hunters to come in and provide feedback on different iterations and prototype developments of WABI. And furthermore, ETech's consent and governance was present at every stage, such as about how their data should be collected, defined, owned, controlled, and accessed. Then, in terms of conceptualizing the graphical representation of wave height and wind visualizations, various in-person and virtual engagement sessions were carried out with ETech and Dr. Liston, as well as an environment scan was conducted to document review different techniques for representing winds and waves. From these initial stages, the design and development stages required iterative mid to high fidelity prototyping of WABI that were then tested for usability and utility through comparative tests during walkthroughs and semi-directed interviews in November 2021. Then to further evaluate and validate the usability and utility of WABI, I co-developed with ETech heuristic evaluations and a feedback system for collecting ground truths during follow-up gatherings in August 2022. As you'll see in this kind of graphic representation of the co-production lifecycle, stage 4 was considered out of scope, which is the release or assuring that the product can be put into a production environment. However, we're currently in the process of making sure everything's tested and can work for the community live in real time right now. So when I first met with ETech in October 2022, Windy, as you can see on the presentation, was expressed as a website that had very nice wind visualizations that were easy for the hunters to use and interpret the current wind conditions. However, 2 of the hunters expressed that it was unreliable in terms of the actual magnitude of wind speeds and directions that were being presented on Windy platform, to the point that one hunter didn't even trust the use of Windy to reliably determine the weather conditions for going out. However, there was this express to really just develop something like Windy, but using the weather station data and model data collected within the community. So reflecting on universal design, however, just because some of these ETech staff members really wanted something like Windy, I wanted to make sure that this was the best option to represent local perceptions of wind and waves through all the communities. So it was determined to run different types of comparative tests during the walkthroughs and semi-structured interviews. So what that meant was testing and developing different ways to visualize wave heights as well as winds, and then compile it into kind of a first prototype of WABI that was kind of a interactive web application where you can kind of use a time slider to select a different time period and then see the wind and wave heights and different ways of representing that. You could have different colors. You can change, the different wind speed colors, as well as the wave height colors. You could change the animation settings as well as to preference. And these are all kind of saved in memory on your browser so that when you open it up again, it would save all your customized settings. And with this first iterated prototype, I went up to Clyde River and I had it all set up at ETech station. And we essentially had a comparative test where the kind of a series of steps were followed. First, select one of the map layers, then go to a specific point on the map, estimate the value there, and answer some questions around the safety of it. So here's a image of one of the hunters in the community testing out wavy with their preferred wind and wave visualizations. So based off feedback from those walkthroughs and semi-directed interviews, I went back to Ottawa and I worked on a second iteration of wavy. This I kind of had casual conversations and emails with our partners in Clyde River to make sure the design and development was kind of aligning with the visions that came and outcomes that came from those walkthroughs. As you'll see, the inclusion of Inuktitut wind and wave terms were added as pop-ups. So you could click anywhere on the map. It'd give you the wind direction and wind speed and what that term was in the community as well. And we kind of reduced the number of map layers as well to only the ones that were preferred by the community members that tested out wavy when it was up there. We also made sure that it was available on mobile devices as well, because it was clear that using mobile devices was preferred over using a desktop computer. Then with the second iteration of wavy, I went back up to Clyde River in August of last year, and we had open discussions on weather and the use of wavy and how to make sure that it is as accessible and usable as possible. Then from there, we had done tech-defined usability rules, or what they call in human-computer interactions heuristics for wavy that were evaluated by the hunters. Another key outcome of this research was the decision to move forward with developing a ground truthing system to make sure that the reliability of the model. So what we had done was originally ETUC had paper-based forms that they would provide to Dr. Liston, who was developing the models. You can see the paper-based forms to the right. So sometimes hunters would be on the boat and start writing this out. It was a bit cumbersome to have to fill this out, every odd time while boating. So what we decided to do was, because they had Garmin InReach devices, we transformed this paper-based form into a XML format and then upload it into the Garmin devices. And now the hunters are able to kind of actually use these ground truthing forms on their Garmin devices, collect the information live while they're out on boats. And we're now actually able to integrate and test against, or evaluate, those ground truths against the model results. And that's Glenn is currently working on right now. I'm not the modeler here for this project. Additional outcomes that came from these kind of follow-up gatherings was we were able to link World Meteorological Organization sea state codes to Clyde River community Inuktitut terms, and we integrated that into wavy. Furthermore, we established that ground truthing feedback system. And lastly, most collaborators agreed that wavy was usable and useful from the heuristic evaluation forms that were completed. I'll just be very brief here because I'm sure that this will get discussed today during our circle conversation, but my positionality as a female Southern settler impacted my ability to essentially effectively reflect on the Clyde River's collaborators' experiences. So for me, for example, when I first was chatting with some of the hunters about the experiences boating and just the nuances of the wave conditions and how it impacts their ability to hunt seals, was difficult for me to conceptualize and think about how to represent in graphical formats, because I myself had never gone seal hunting before. However, I had the fortunate opportunity to get to go up there, go hunting with the guys, try and spot seals on the boat and really understand the nuances between very calm waters, slight ripples impacting visibility, and really having that lived experience to think about how we can help design and develop products and tools that can be best used and valuable for the community of users that are intending to use it. I'll end there, and I want to obviously give a big thank you to the research partners, particularly Ely Saxophonic Society and ETUC Heritage and Research Center, as well as Carleton University's Geomatics and Cartographic Research Center. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. That was, yeah, it was fantastic. and really happy to hear about the nuts and bolts and the actual doing of the work that I briefly touched on from the research group at Carleton yesterday. So many thanks for that depth of understanding. So many important points that you touched on. I hope we can chat about a little bit later. Does anybody have any burning questions for Julia? This moment? If not, do we have Ryan on the line and to give Rebecca's talk for today?
There we go. Hello.
Oh, hello. How are you?
Pretty good. How are you?
Oh, I'm so well. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sorry that Rebecca wasn't able to do so, but would you like to talk about the work that you've been doing together for us today?
All right. So first of all, my name is Ryan Ransom. I am from Akwesasne. It's a Mohawk Nation on the border of the US and Canada. I'm not as well versed as Rebecca because she is the one who initiated this. I'm more of a community liaison who came on board last year when I came across the post about a workshop she was holding in Akwesasne. And ever since then, I've kind of been helping them out. We've been instituting some summer camps for students, and I'm actually getting ahead of myself. So the actual project is called Mohawk Atlas, and I believe it's the same program that Julia was talking about that she was using. And what we're doing is we're creating this atlas for the use of the Mohawk people to learn about our original place names in our language. So what we've been doing is we've been creating points across New York State, Ontario, Quebec, and even outside the Northeast. And we've been putting our traditional names at those locations, along with any historical documents we find, audio or video recordings we have of elders talking about those names. And what we're doing is we're hoping we can use this to help revitalize the language. And that's where our summer camps are coming in, because we're teaching our students how to put points into this map, and they're also working with elders, so they're getting that exposure to the language.
Well, thanks so much for that. Really appreciate you joining us. And do you have any slides to show from Rebecca?
Yes, she sent me a PowerPoint.
Okay, sure. Yeah, whatever you're comfortable sharing with us today.
Yep.
Just grateful for your words. So if you'd like to share a few, I'll hand it over to you.
All right.
Lovely. And if you can coordinate that on your end with Zoom, maybe we can have some technical help on this side too.
Yeah, so there should be a green button there, right, in your interface, which you have permission to click and just share whatever part of your screen you want to.
Yep.
Thanks for this probably last minute coordination. Put you on the
A
spot.
little.
Just a little.
All right, let me. Sorry, 1 second.
Sure thing. So yes, as I understand the Mohawk Atlas that Rebecca is working on, she's also in the research group that I'm at Carleton, and it is based on the Nunalit open source, free and open source software that has been developed there. It's been used for and an iterative process of development and for community-based work over a number of decades in that research group. And it's the same that that same framework that Julia was talking about too. So while Ryan's preparing here, I'll just say that a little bit that I talked about yesterday of building data architecture, part of the real issue in the long history in working with communities that they found at the research group that I'm working with now is that using simple relational databases, just they were not doing it. It became just way too much work over time. With this kind of nuanced multidimensionality that's inherent in this kind of data and way of knowing and being, where it's multifaceted, and I very much appreciate how we'll talk about this again later in the responsibility gap that I talked about yesterday, but in how Julia mentioned her positionality, myself as well, and many of us who are settlers here, that there is nuance that we can acknowledge that we may not be able to capture and appreciate in technical constraints, but something like the Nunalit framework and the ontologies, mapping over ontologies that I talked about, mapping different knowledge systems and using that as a data architecture rather than a colonial structure. These are ways to get at mapping these nuances that are not adequately captured in the English language and thus are not adequately captured in the data architecture that we currently are using. And that's the basis of our databases. It's the basis of the World Wide Web. It's the basis of a lot of thinking that technology, that we outsource to technology and we don't really think about on a daily basis. So these are ways to sort of slowly get at that and map over some nuances about deeper understandings and different dimensions of understandings that are a little bit different. How are we doing, Ryan? Would you?
I'm having a little technical difficulty. I'm on a work computer and I was working on a report before this and I didn't realize they didn't give me access to share.
Oh, okay. No problem.
Did she share the PowerPoint with you? I know.
I don't have it. You're welcome to send it and we can
Okay.
show it later, or we can just go into discussion as well. So yeah, I'm open to either. So would you like to, if you'd like to say a few words about them, and don't worry about the slides, you're also quite welcome to do that.
Yeah, I can also, while I'm doing that, I can forward it to someone, the PowerPoint.
Sure thing. Wesley, are you open to that? Okay. Do you have his email?
I don't know if Ryan's, but
Okay.
one second. Just because somebody doesn't.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. So
Yeah, let me just send this real quick and.
it's called Nunalit. Nunalit, yeah, it can be found, sort of found at the GCRC site, but the idea here, so one of the slides yesterday, I talked about, be fair and care. So fair data principles are something that are pretty, everyone sort of acknowledges those that work with data a lot. That's the principles of findable, accessible, interoperable, usable data. And in working in global committees like I work with Nathaniel and Geo and UN geospatial information management committees, this is pretty common and pretty important. Everyone talks about open data, open data, accessible data, findable data, something that's reusable and everybody can be on board with. And this is actually quite common because a lot of data that's acquired, especially satellite data and otherwise, they're acquired by governments, right? By national space agencies, and with government and with public funding, it has to be open and available to people. So that's what's less common is using care principles that are specific to ownership and control of data in communities. And so we can talk about that in a few minutes, but I wanted to reference that because the Nunalit framework is built such that it is free and open source software and it's available online and GitHub. And if you have some technical expertise, you can easily use that. And the idea is that there's choice there. If you use that architecture, you can build software on top of it that you can choose to share or not. So the software itself is open and free, and communities can, or anyone using it, can feed data into it and use that as an architecture to build software on top of whatever applications like Julia was describing that might be useful for communities. communities in whatever scenario that, in whatever fits the needs of that community and what the environmental monitoring assessment needs are, and make that choice about what's open and what's not. So, so that's Nunavut.
Any luck, Ryan? You did. Hooray.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, it's a secure link. All right.
We're still working.
It shouldn't. You should still be able to access it.
Yeah, it's just asking for now a code. So of course it is. This is a very secure presentation.
It wasn't me. All I'm saying is it wasn't me. I've had to put that code in so many times.
I'm just trying to download it.
Yeah, it's big.
Okay, so I'm just thinking about, these, so I love that you brought up care, because that's obviously really important, like often working with community, there's been such a strong history of research and data collection that's been extracted that often communities would prefer to.
My name is Rebecca Ingram.
Control over their data, and so it's important to have that layers of protection. So there's that safety and sharing and collecting.
Research
And
says-
just use for the community. But so that's a comment. My question is, you mentioned that there's basic technical expertise to use Inuit, and I'm just seeing a bottleneck in terms of who in community would have those expertise and the cost to bring someone trusted in to facilitate that, like accessing consulting groups like my own or Firelight is very expensive. And so I'm just, curious about, and maybe that's where this community can consider how they can break down barriers to accessing those technical expertise. So that's, how do you see that bottleneck sort of being busted open?
Oh, that's such a great question. And I guess there are no good, easy, quick answers to that really exist. That bottleneck. And it seems as though this architecture, even though it's open and it's free and can be used, it's really just a framework. And so it's a framework for co-development. For people who, like in this community, who bring a particular expertise in a particular science, that's technical or science, and work with community, and that co-development happens. And then the applications and the needed software and the needs are met, and it's built on top of that open software. So they build together, but it does take that space, that funded co-development space, and that's huge. And if you're relying on academic funding for that to happen, there's this huge risk of continuing this problem of it being academic oriented and the project dictated by academics. I would love to hear thoughts about how to break open that bottleneck.
Do we want, it looks like Rebecca has little snippets of video in this. So let's watch it together, and then maybe we'll hand over to everyone, and we've still got quite a bit of time in this talk.
Great.
So we
Thanks
open it
for
up
that.
again. Sorry about the voice, like it just started auto play there. So I was like, oh, hi, Rebecca. Here it is. Okay.
Thanks.
There's the atlas, and there's Ryan. I'm trying to show Ryan. Here's our whole screen, and here's a presentation. Okay. Okay. So there's a land acknowledgement which wasn't spoken.
Hi there, my name is Rebecca Ingram. I'm a research associate at the Geomatics and Cartographic Research Center at Carleton University, and I'm currently the project coordinator for the Atlas of Konyakahaga Space Project.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Ryan Ransom. I'm from Akwesasne. I'm in the Mohawk Territory on the border of Canada and the United States.
Many Indigenous place names have been borrowed into non-Indigenous languages within North America, such as in English and French. These names often include environmental information as an element of the meaning, and this element may or may not be recognized or acknowledged in the borrowing language. Indigenous place names that have been borrowed into non-Indigenous naming conventions include some of the ones that we're very familiar with, such as Quebec, Ontario, Canada itself, Saskatchewan, Winnipeg, and the list goes on. These names all provide linguistic, geographical, environmental, cultural, and historical information. A really good example is Kahnawake. There are 2 instances of Kahnawake in the Mohawk language, and many instances in other Haudenosaunee languages. In both uses of Kahnawake, one of which is across from present-day Montreal, the other of which is located near London, New York, that name now marks the place where rapids formerly existed, but no longer do, because in one case, the St. Lawrence Seaway went through and modified the entire waterway structure. In the case of New York State, the Erie Canal went through. So in both situations, there are no longer rapids at Kahnawake. However, those names demonstrate inherent Indigenous knowledge of the land, and therefore they may themselves be considered Indigenous knowledge. What these elements of language mean becomes an issue when the naming language itself becomes less frequently used, when it becomes endangered, or when it becomes dormant. In many cases, the loss of the naming language itself may also represent the loss of that traditional environmental knowledge, which is contained within the place names. For example, we know that Lake Ontario comes from the Wendat language, Onyadario, and that it means something like the main lake or the big lake. However, a name like Manhattan, we have some ideas about what it means. Probably means Mannahatta, and likely has something to do with the reeds that were used to make bows in one of the Lenape languages. In other cases, we have a lot of really good guesses, but none of them can be entirely confirmed. The Hochelaga is a really good example of a name that we would all like to know for sure means something else, but that is eluding us a bit.
Kamehameha, known in English as the Mohawk language, is an endangered Indigenous language from which place names in North America have been borrowed. The names Canada and Ontario come from 2 related languages. In Kamehameha, the Nada means village, and Onyadalio refers to a beautiful or in some older translations of a great lake. There are currently conflicting numbers, but most estimates say there are 3,000 speakers left. Most of those speakers are older in age, which means the time to learn from them is starting to run out. My community just recently lost several fluent speakers, which was a great loss and highlights the need to increase efforts to revitalize the language.
In 2020, I completed my doctoral dissertation, which was a linguistic overview for about 130 Gangnam names from both oral history and archival sources. It's a little bit of a unique project at Carleton because I was advised by 3 separate departments within the university. It included the School of Linguistics and Language Studies, from which I received my degree, the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies, as well as School of Indigenous and Canadian Studies. I also followed OCAP protocols, De Ohade Gaswanda, which is known in English as the Two-Row Wampum, and guides Indigenous and non-Indigenous relationships between the Haudenosaunee and non-Haudenosaunee. And I also used an Indigenous Community Advisory Board, which was made up of community members from all of the communities in which I was working, and which helped not only to guide me in terms of protocols, but tell me what was most useful to them. Despite having an Indigenous Community Advisory Board, the dissertation itself was over 250 pages long. It contained, as I said, 130 Ganyangeha names, as well as their morphological breakdown and elements of their meaning. The text was extremely academic, using very technical language. It wasn't particularly accessible or user. To try and remedy some of the accessibility issues, we created the Atlas of Gonyak-Gehaga space. And some of the elements of the dissertation itself have worked their way into this digital platform. It was launched in 2020, and it's been funded by both SSHRC as well as National Indian and Northern Trust Fund. The overall goal of the Atlas is to document, analyze, and preserve Gonyak-Gehaga linguistic, cultural, environmental, and historical information through association with place names. The Atlas uses the Nunallit mapping platform, which can be found at nunallit.org. This platform was developed at Carleton's Geomatics and Cartographic Research Center, where I'm currently a research associate. It's an open source platform, and it was developed specifically for the use of Indigenous communities. It uses a new BSD license, and the purpose of this enables communities to use the platform to redistribute and to modify the platform itself without any obligation to make those modifications available to others. The platform also adheres to OCAP and CARE principles and protects Indigenous data, and I'll talk about that in a bit. We use a JSON format, and this allows for an easy association between any of the files that are uploaded into the Atlas itself. As a result of that, the Atlas is capable of audio, video, graphic, photographic attachments, but also text attachments, which can be really important for things like PDFs that contain information regarding treaties.
The Atlas research team is comprised of both Indigenous and non-Indigenous collaborators, academics, and non-academics. Dr. Gahande Horn-Miller, she is the primary investigator. Dr. Rebecca Ingram is a coordinator. Myself, Ryan Ransom, I'm a community liaison from Akwesasne. The GCRC team implements software requests from community through Rebecca and myself. The Akwesasne Cultural Center houses the Atlas and mapping workshops. The Mohawk Mapping Collective is a community-based collective which provides input to the direction of the Atlas project and advises on its needs. There are elders and language speakers who come in to help us with place names, their meanings, and the history behind those places. And lastly, the community at large.
Everyone who works on the research team, including students and volunteers, agree to adhere to the protocols and principles that I previously outlined and that were used in the dissertation. This includes OCAP. All information in the Atlas is under the ownership, control, access, and possession of different Gonyak-Gehaga communities who enter information into the Atlas. The Atlas was created in order to make the dissertation information more accessible to those communities. We follow the Ohande Gaswenta, as I described earlier, which is in a lot of ways a protocol of non-interference. We say neither shall attempt to steer the other's vessel, and in addition to ideas of friendship and peace. We also follow local protocols. This includes providing food or gas money and lodging for those who come into the community from outside from other communities. We also make sure to pay elders especially for their valuable work.
Documentation and preservation are achieved through community mapping workshops and youth summer camps, in which participants are taught how to drop pins into the Atlas and upload their own multimedia materials, including text, photos, video, audio, and documents such as PDFs. At present, over 190 points have been entered into the Atlas together with 155 associated media files. The collaborative process of Atlas creation, mapping, documentation, and analysis is a union of Indigenous and non-Indigenous knowledge and worldviews.
In community mapping workshops, not only do we teach the use of the platform, including dropping pins and adding media, we also use three main techniques to document place names. The first of these is that researching, going through archival materials, including maps and documents in various libraries, including online, bringing them back to the community for discussion and connection with world histories. Second technique is by asking about local names and the associated knowledge that are currently used within the communities. And finally, one of the things that I really enjoy doing is going on small trips with on the landscape with the speakers, elders, and community members. This includes land back summer camp.
The atlas itself can be used as a facilitator for intergenerational knowledge, teaching youth to use Earth observation technologies such as drones, which we refer to as Jigsaw. It's a word we came up with last summer during the summer camp. It refers to a big fly, basically. Use these Jigsaw to capture aerial imagery. Elders offer knowledge in Ganyakeha of past use of landscape features, and then the youth describe what they see from the imagery and attempt to use Ganyakeha. Involving elders as mentors and youth as apprentices helps to forge new intergenerational connections through the medium of the land itself. And we are currently planning our next summer camp for August 7th to the 11th in Akwesasne.
This is an example of some of the media that was put into the atlas last year at Land Back Summer Camp by some of the youth in the camp itself. This footage was taken during a pontoon trip to the mouth of the Raquette River and at the St. Lawrence.
The atlas is being developed principally as a community resource to be housed at the Akwesasne Cultural Center and Museum. The overarching aim is to present a firm foundation from which to reclaim the indigenous knowledge, pedagogical, and cognitive processes associated with place. This will also provide a seed from which to grow other land-based language revitalization activities.
If you have any questions about the atlas, the Nunali platform, or Land Back Summer Camp, please feel free to email us or you can check out the Mohawk Atlas itself at the webpage provided. Yeah, what go on?
All right, so we still have, sorry, stop share there. We still have quite a bit of time. So I'd love Christy and everyone who came to join, please come up and to take the time and tell us more. Yeah,
Maybe I'll just
the systems thinking ones,
show
right?
a couple of things. Yeah, thank you. But we don't have a lot of time, so I don't want to keep talking.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just show, oh yeah, so maybe I'll just go to the end here and talk about, leave up the slides, and talking about what it means to start to decolonize science and tech. And these perspectives were talked about quite a lot, but maybe I'll just leave up this slide and thinking a little bit about what the responsibility gap is for us in thinking of, as I said, as I called it, conceptualizations, bringing in diverse ways of thinking about the world and connections between things and their meaning. And before this session, Wesley was saying, we need everything we can get right now. And there's an elder here who I've heard say many times, it's an all hands on deck approach. So that's from Dan Longboat. And so I say that I think about that a lot. I think about that phrase a lot, especially as a settler coming into this work. And I gave most of you a brief history of how I came to this work in this talk yesterday. But yeah, in a time where our science is needed more than ever, and we need ways to action that science and ways to actually make change on the ground, and close this gap and figure out why we're not adequately communicating the science, or why that's not ingestible by people who need it, and are not involving people. So maybe I'll just leave this up, and I would actually really love for for Barb and Mary Claire to introduce yourselves if you'd like, and anyone else as well. And I'd like to just welcome you up here, or welcome anyone for conversation. Maybe we can just take the next 20 minutes if people not only have questions, but if thoughts come up from what you heard from the talk yesterday or what you've observed from the talks today. I'm really interested to hear how, if people have any thoughts about the own work they do in statistics and what that could really look like in terms of co-learning and co-decision making from these concrete examples that we heard about today. And I was really enlivened to hear that, and I do hear this from people doing this work in community, that is a snowball effect. You know, when it seems like people from Western sciences are sort of always hedging, like how do we support, how do we become involved? I don't understand like how to help action the science that I do. What is my supportive role in working with communities, working with people on the ground? But when it happens, when this magic happens, it is a snowball effect, and that grows. So there are serious challenges, not only historical interactions and data extractivism, knowledge extractivism, and inequities in just cognitive justice, recognizing those two streams of knowing and being, that they're equal, but also very serious economic challenges, and how we, and what Mary Claire was getting at, and how do we meet that bottleneck of meeting capacity that's in community and recognizing that capacity that exists that we've been hearing about today. And that's traditional knowledge that's held in community and other kinds of capacities, but also technical capacities. How do we meet that gap that happens? Okay, I think I've talked enough, but do you guys want to introduce yourselves? Feel free to come up or just see
Sure. Navigation. Bonjour, I'm in the for More with what the additional so I introduced myself using one little of knowing that I speak, and want to share with you the Potawatomi from the Shawnee, Oklahoma Potawatomi Nation. I'm also on the faculty here of the Tenure Index School for Indigenous Studies, teaching in that Indigenous Environmental Studies and Sciences program. So my background's, I've reinvented myself many times throughout my life. I'm a professional engineer. I worked in soils and geotechnical engineering, and now we're focusing on the Indigenous knowledge side of things and working to help students and researchers do that collaboration across.
I'm Mary Claire Jewell, so faculty here at Trent School of Environment. I actually started my academic career co-teaching with Barb a few courses in the Indigenous Environmental Studies and Sciences program. I do a lot of environmental contaminants and collaborative work with communities across Turtle Island, and founded the company Ruth referenced Collective Environment. So we're an academic, but also a sort of consulting hat. And yeah, so I was so grateful that Christy invited both of us to sort of also share our perspectives on knowledge systems collaboration and sort of bridging that gap, building relationships, and using the tools that we have the privilege to develop as scientists or researchers to advocate for change and to really promote environmental justice and make sure that the knowledge we generate or the data that we generate isn't just beneficial to the privileged and the wealthy, but everyone can access it in a way that they benefit to. So thank you very much. I don't know how do we want to start the conversation. Does anyone have questions? Nick, do you have a question over there?
Yeah.
Amazing.
First of all, can I say I'm very grateful to meet Nick. Thanks so much for doing
That's Ruth, and what were some of the things that she got out of doing this project most?
So I jumped on board to this project when I was right about to start university, and before working with my nation's fishery assessment program or working for collective environmental, I didn't really have a good idea of what I wanted to do post-secondary. And I think seeing the collaboration with my nation and realizing that my Indigenous knowledge can be used alongside Western sciences and the knowledge that I've grown up with, like going through the school system, I had never seen those two things cross or collaborate before, and jumping on this project, I got the opportunity to see Indigenous knowledge, not just Indigenous knowledge, but the knowledge of my community being used alongside Western science to help my community. And when I saw that happening, I just realized that like this could be the path that I go down. And I guess this project helped me realize like what I want to do and where I want my career to take me, and how awesome it is to be part of something that represents sort of like both sides of my identity and using them together. I think also being able to work on a project that was centered around my community was something really special, because it hit home, and I know that the work that we're doing is good work, and that it's benefiting my cousins and my aunties and my uncles and my grandparents. So I guess just being welcomed into the world of good work, I guess.
With the cousins and
start about getting the home itself was
I guess my family they'd probably be okay with whatever path I decided to go down, but they are excited that I got to do something that's benefiting my community, and a lot of my family is also there's so like they're glad that the work I'm doing is supporting them.
Is there a big decline in the whitefish activity declines that it's not meeting the needs of the population then?
Yeah, so like for the past 2 decades or so, there's been a steady decline, and there's been commercial fish harvesters from my community who have actually had to shut down their fishing business and no longer make money from that, because there's just so little whitefish that are not being caught. And right now in my community, that is a fishing community that has fished for thousands of years, there's only about 3 active fishermen in my community right now because of the whitefish.
Because I think your area is a beautiful area.
It is, yeah.
That's Togo Mori is part of it's just a gorgeous place to go and visit and camp and whatever it is. I think probably there is very little contamination with the fish. It's not only the harvesting. I don't really know if there is any study about. I think you said you were to contaminants. Is there any contaminants in the fish that led to the decline of?
We don't think it's the contaminants. The harvesters and researchers talk a lot about the invasive species coming over and changing many of the Great Lakes. And now it's also thinking about human impact. So the Bamaj project, you know, with the ROV and community knowledge and the tagging of fish, we're seeing that these shoals and the areas around the shoals are, you know, being inundated with what's coming off the land, like debris or whatever. So not so much pollution, but just changes to the water and the habitats from invasive species and things like that. Yeah.
I think it's quite interesting. I think you are saying, and this is a good meeting for you presenting this stuff, because environmental statistics is looking at integration of information and increasing diversity. And I think this is very important thing, and it would be good to to contribute to such program. And the other thing that I was wondering around, we have many nations in the country, and the languages are quite diverse between the groups. Is there any kind of dictionary that get people to be able to communicate?
A dictionary that's cross language?
Yeah.
Yeah, you see, I speak Arabic, and I can go from Arabic into English, and from Arabic into French, and all these things. And now we have, the country here is diverse. You have the whole continent. And if you compare this continent with Africa, you can imagine how many languages in Africa, how many languages are here. And I think it's quite interesting to figure out how to link these things. You know, how to link them with the Western, if you call it Western languages, I think I call it universal languages, with all the other languages, linked.
I didn't suggest going one step further to say that'd be really fascinating to hear what in their language was capturing concepts that might be Western knowledge, stationarity. What's the concept? A lot of the assumptions, like when we frameworks, are those captured in a different way or unique way in languages?
Kind of getting back to Julia's work about like her models not capturing the observations and experiences on the water. Yes.
I think in my own work, obviously we're taught to be reductionist, compartmentalize, break down. And I was taught that, and the pathway of my career has been to deprogram from that, use that to where you can, but understand the limits and change that worldview to something that's far more systems thinking, especially for resilience. So it's far more adaptable type of thinking that you construct one model that you can reapply or transfer that knowledge. So I think it'd be wonderful, to look at the models we're developing as the statistical community and see how we could merge that, right? How do we connect that with indigenous knowledge within some of these atlas type tools?
See, one thing that would be quite interesting to contribute, how do you count in the language? How do you write numbers in the language? Because everybody counts, and the question is, how is this, the gross?
There's a lot of evidence that the way that mathematics was visualized by people and how it's encoded in language has a lot to do with some of the euphemisms and the things that come through in the language where they say many, but what does many mean? Does that mean 5? Does that mean 1,000? Like, how have they encoded numeracy through words? Because we all do it, right? Every language in human history has done this. But how was different for every language.
I'll give you one idea with fish populations, work I did in my doctorate.
I mean, most of the world's fish populations are either highly migratory or they school, which means they group together. So a lot of the fisheries models, to the current day, don't take schooling into account. So we're managing the world's fisheries from a Western point of view without taking into account any of the schooling behavior, language behavior of fishes. Whereas I think, I'm right in saying indigenous knowledge really, that was a major part of understanding how fish moved and how they manage the fishery. So, we could really benefit from that knowledge, because what's happening is we have this measure called catch per unit effort. And what we're doing is we're saying, okay, there's lots of fish in these regions, and based on this index, as long as fish from another region keep moving in, so the index doesn't change, there's always immigration from elsewhere. Right, so if we're not doing our surveys and really understanding the whole domain of how these fish are moving and where they're collecting, then you could think that the fish population is just great, but in fact it's on a rapid decline. I think in her presentation, I think she said when they were using the Western type of fishing, they didn't catch any fish. And when they used their one, they caught lots of fish.
Yeah, there's a question here as well for Ruth. So Ruth, you saw it. So the question is just, there's GPS tracking, and Cassie was asking, like, what's the story that the data contributed to for the community, if anything? What did your community learn from being able to watch those versus when you told us how they were like, well, obviously it's going to behave that way, and then you saw that behavior. Was there anything unusual that they learned from it?
Well, I think just having the data, like the video that I showed, was really cool for all of our community members and fish harvesters to see, because we've never been able to track the fish. So to see it was really cool. And then with the data that we captured, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was federal government agencies that allocated an amount of the shoal that was protected during spawning times. And for a long time, community members said that these fish use more than just this protected area. And we knew that, and the community members knew how the fish were going to behave and where they were going to go and when they were going to be on the shoal, when they were going to be off, because they've worked with these fish and developed a relationship with these fish for hundreds of thousands of years, multiple generations. They know these fish like the back of their hands, but having the data to go with what our communities are saying, it makes it a bigger, what I'm looking for, but it gives a bigger meaning to what we're talking about, and it's a visualization, and it shows that what we're saying is true. These fish are using more than just what is being protected, so we need to change the way Western science thinks about how much should be protected, and listen to this community that has known these fish for as long as they've been around, that these fish are using more than what is being allocated to protect them.
I just sort of like to say one thing about how, say, statisticians have been considering. So we often in our departments, we had consulting centers, and maybe we still do in many departments. We like more to think about that we're collaborators rather than consultants. But what we've always been taught is that you have to use the knowledge of the subject matter from which you get the data, or where you actually help plan the study. And so I see that what we're talking about here just naturally fits into the way that statisticians, or at least traditionally, thought about approaching the problem. Now, I'm very concerned about what's going to happen with AI and all these things, where the interaction is being lost. But I think that this is a very nice community and a very nice opportunity for us to say that I think it's great that in fact you're now talking about being involved Because in order to work with these problems, that's what the statistician is.
And just to comment, like when you talk about where do you get the data, if you only use Western science or perspectives, the allocated area of the shoal, so this is if you're allowed to do like repairs on docks and things like that, there's certain windows that the federal government allows you to do that in water work based on what species might be spawning there. So this area, you know, you would just be thinking about collecting data from that allocated area. But if you talk to the local communities and create equitable space for their knowledge, then you realize that you need to be taking data from a wider area, that they're using greater spaces. And like you said, with like AI, that consultation isn't happening, that it's just, you know, whatever is already in the colonial systems of thinking, that's where it's drawing its information from. So yeah, there's that crazy disconnect that we're just going to keep that gap going if we only rely on things like AI or current data sets or current ways of thinking.
So yesterday, in my talk, I kind of threw out this anti-web idea, right? And just speaking to AI and the context. And yeah, and thank you so much for bringing in what statisticians are how they're classically trained, and context is everything. I think you're right. This is what we're talking about. Context is everything. And we have just been missing so much of the context. So what if we take a step back and think about how we're constructing the technology to bring in more context, to map out more multidimensional understandings from many different ways of knowing being. And that is our training model. And that can be what we use for AI to help us produce better, more accurate models. If we're going to use technology and rely on it for sciences and help it drive solutions or drive meeting these pressing problems that we all face together, I think we have to step back and we have to constellate together and bring in this context.
I think as John, you were saying, that ask the right questions, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be an actual structured model. It could be just having it as a visual hypothesis that you test.
I think we've all, I say we all, those of us that are in the model, we've all had models where you know the model's not capturing the data. It's not capturing the system. And you're doing the best you can. And more flexibility has been one of the greatest benefits of the last 20, 30 years with finally getting Bayesian methods. So that you integrate these little pieces of knowledge you have, you know, it can't be over there. And you need to incorporate that. And I think there must be somewhere in the future, I hope, a better modeling system where we're able to integrate uncertainty about things and bring in these almost anecdotal, community-based pieces of information that are evidence. They're just not hard data. They're community data. They matter.
Yeah, I think if we are talking about data and information, there are different ways of doing things that people have done traditionally and non-traditionally. One of the cases that is taking place is the devastation of the fish population all over the world. There is overfishing and huge big nets going around, killing birds and catching lots of a huge amount of fish. And then you have the fish farms that are contaminating the areas around where the fish is being taken. So there are many issues that would be of importance in the Great Lakes. Quite a bit of the fish is not edible. You can't eat it because there was contamination. There was contamination from the Love Canal or from the around the Niagara River type of thing. So there are lots of changes that have taken place that devastated the thing. And the traditional knowledge is quite, I think, it's quite important. And trying to figure out what areas that should be protected. And if these farms, fish farms are contaminating the area, what can be done about reducing it? I don't really know, but it's everywhere. So I think
50% of the world's fish is lost to bycatch. That's how fishing are fishing. And I've sat in meetings in that realm of domain of knowledge when people say, how do you count that in your fish population model? You're counted for that. It could be simply accounting for something that maybe have less data, but there's some way to kind of bring it into the model. Look at food systems. 40% of the world's food is based in. So a lot of the world's problems is all on pollution and parts of the cycle, but it's circularity, our economy, our sustainability that we need to close the circle and understand how do we deal with our waste, a lot of our streams, and that's where I think we can learn from indigenous communities as well.
I'm going to say something a little controversial too. The risks in my mind, and excuse me, I'm not a modeler, so I this might be an ignorant comment and a controversial comment, but models lack relationship with what they're bringing together. And so that's why it doesn't, in my mind, when I work with Indigenous knowledges, that's at the center of how we interact with what we're trying to understand. And so then when you make choices, you're thinking about the waste, you're thinking about what is lost, and you make choices to make sure that there is no waste, that you're respecting all beings in all spaces. And so I think one of the big challenges that I guess I'll leave in your hands is, how do you ensure you have respectful, responsible relationships with the data and information that you're gathering, and then helping inform decisions? Because there is that disconnect as soon as you put it into something that's focused on numbers instead of those relationships. So just something to throw out there and think about. And I've had to learn how to rethink the toxicology work I do, because it wasn't always honoring those relationships. And I'm still learning. So I haven't completely figured it out in my field, but I'm trying. Yeah.
You see, I think this says something about working in the lab where you have an experiment and putting some contaminants in and seeing how the contaminants actually will have an issue of the fish or whatever it is, or noticing this in the wild environment. You see, if you go into the wild environment, there is a huge difference between what you see in the lab and what you see in the real environment. And I think that's what probably you are saying, the issue of jumping from the experiment into the field, how you generalize this kind of thing is a big issue. But most of these things, the fact that you have quantitative relationship, it gives you more strength of knowing that this was significant in the lab, and it could have some impact in the real environment. Because if you find, you see, one of the things the statisticians do about determining safe level, you have an experiment, you have effluents that is coming into the environment. You dilute this effluent, and you try to study the experiment, what is the accumulation as the concentration decrease in the structure. And this gives you some idea about what you do in the environment. So numbers are important. But this has to be interpreted within the existing knowledge, because even when you are defining variables you want to study, this is based on traditional knowledge of the people in the community. They know that this variable is more important than another variable. You know, this type of things. That's it. So the modelers have to take this knowledge and explain.
Yeah, you have comments? Yeah, so actually, my question was a little different. So Dr. was just telling like in the fish example, like so whenever a fish is immigrating for a different place, that can also be accommodated like as a part of the data. But if we think of such scenarios, then where should we stop? I mean, like we can keep thinking of like different scenarios as such, and that can expand our like whole database. But like as we can see currently, like in AI and other places, like for large language models, this VGG and these things, these are already too big, and the computation power is already like at its max, you can say. So then, like if we want to accommodate such things, and like say for example, we want to accommodate the like fish regulations for the whole world, then
yeah, but your question is really how do you build these systems?
yeah, like is it like should we look into it like that way, or like is there like if we just concentrate on a smaller problem and then maybe we can just
Yes, so I mean, I guess this, my view on it anyway is that it's okay to draw boundaries in your thinking, and as long as you have an idea of what system you're working in. And I would challenge any science. I think what we do as scientists through our careers is we develop in our lives this knowledge map more and more, so that so methodologists can say, I know how all the methods and assumptions they're all linked. Is that often communicated to people coming up in the field? Here's the knowledge map of statistics, right? I don't think we do a good job of that at all. So I think if we could say, hey, this is our current knowledge map for statistics, and all students are getting into this, and other practitioners can also have some relational, some knowledge map that we can work by. Like I would argue, we don't even know our own knowledge map. So it's okay to do refined work, but it's really important to know how that connects to this.
Well, I think Nathaniel was when he was talking about missing the fish. This was connected with the salmon in the West.
That's right.
But what happened? They decided that the harvest declined drastically. There is no fish. And it's basically the fish changed the area that the fish was coming out to the other side. And you can't detect this except after the fact. They have the pattern that the fish travels up to Alaska and then come back. And they were monitoring the area that they traditionally monitor. But the fish then changed direction. So that's what they was the problem.
With migration, there's a lot of some inability to predict changing of migration routes. But the one thing that's really predictable in fish populations is the fact that most of them move for predation and part of finding new routes. So there's a well-known school of behavior, but that's not taken into account at all in the assessments of fish population. So we're using an index that most of the experts still agree, they'll agree this is wrong, we shouldn't be using that. But the science isn't, like in water fields, is hitting and making impact in the assessments. And so I think my view is that the water fields need to do far better on impact, because the problems are accelerating. And we're writing our papers, but it's all great knowledge, but it's not going where it needs to actually have impact or change. It's a positive ways.
I have to jump in. This is fascinating. We should go around. But unfortunately, we have coffee and we have to wrap up this session. So, Christy, did you want to say a final word to wrap up the session?
One final word, but
Yes.
I would love to hear from James Wilkes. I invited him to also come and join in the conversation. Do you have a question or comment?
Sure, I'll keep it brief. I wanted to start by thanking the presenters, Ruth and Julia and Ryan that we met today.
I wanted to make a comment based on what Mary Claire shared about, relationship and also thinking about waste. You mentioned waste, and so maybe this is helpful. I think about colonialism as the cause of waste. We think about how much wasted fish or how much wasted food, wasted land, the contamination of air, water, earth. It is a product of colonialism. Colonialism is the root cause of all of those environmental problems. And it's because it seeks to sever relationships. So thinking about knowledge maps being severed on purpose by design by colonialism. And colonialism, one of those words, like thinking about it as domination. It's a dominator way of thinking. It's a dominator empire way of thinking about the world, making decisions about the world. It's not inevitable. It is a choice. Some societies have chosen empire. Some societies have known better and have kept it in check. And so thinking about indigenous knowledges and thinking about wider knowledge systems as repairing those relationships, repairing those knowledge webs, repairing those ecosystems so that we don't waste forever the world, that we don't waste ourselves, that we don't waste the earth, that we don't waste the water. Thinking about our friend Dan Longo, he's got this spin on the old adage about give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime. But he's taken it one step further to think, if we teach human beings about their relationships to fish, we will have human beings and fish forever. That's the opportunity of reconnecting those relationships, saying no to colonialism, saying no to reductionism, and saying yes to complexity, saying yes to our livelihoods and our futures. So thank you for the presentation and the panel today. Really appreciated it.
You are very wise. You are a wise man.
So there was a message as well from just for Ryan. He had to duck out a few minutes ago. And so he just said, students, if there's many professionals who'd like to join and to contribute to the education camps and the things that he's running, he's always happy to talk and to connect. And there's details there. So I'll try to grab that and I'll share it in Discord so we have a record of it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mary Claire. Thank you, Barb. And thank you, Christy. And Julia's online, and Ruth, thank you all. And there is food for everyone and coffee for everyone. Please caffeinate yourselves.